All right, and we are recording, and we are live on Twitch. So this is the first um, new experiment of my classes in Twitch streaming with um, guest speakers from my class. The class is, I don't know why it's not showing me, it's showing you, but um, let me just put myself on. There we go. Okay. Um, this is my class. It's Management 351 at the College of Charleston. Minority entrepreneurship. I'm in the process of changing it to women and minority-owned businesses, just to expand the reach of it. And with me today as the first speaker, and appropriately, first speaker is Dr. Laquita Blockson from Agnes College, who actually created this class many years ago. And the class hasn't actually been taught since she left. And so I had been trying to find somebody to teach it, and I haven't found anyone. So you know what, I'll do it myself. So let me make sure I can switch back. View, speaker view. Okay. Oh, actually, here we go. We could just do both of us. There.
Wonderful.
Okay. So, so welcome.
Thank you so much, Dave and Dr. Hanson. It's wonderful to be able to speak with your students today and speak with you and our various audiences here in Twitch and later on YouTube and the like. So, Twitch is a wonderful platform. We can talk about Twitch all day if you really want to, but that's not the focus of our discussion today. But nonetheless, thank you so much. So those of you who are followers of me, Laquita B, thank you for joining in to this interesting, wonderful conversation. So you get to know a little bit more about the work and the research that I do outside of Twitch, and and the things that talk about in terms of minority entrepreneurship in general, and specifically some of my research on Black women entrepreneurs in particular. So, Dr. Hanson, thank you again for inviting me to speak with your students today and with your audience today.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It's not just students, it's the audience. Yeah. I have in my regular interviews with DJs and everything, I have an opening question I always ask people, and that's what music means to them. But that's obviously not. That's a different story. We could talk about some other time. But to put it in the context of this class, what I'd like to ask is what does entrepreneurship mean to you? And I don't mean like, what's the definition, right? Because we're not going to debate that. But I mean, what does it mean to you? Why are you interested in it? Why do you teach it? What does it mean to you?
It speaks to economic empowerment, simply put. It allows for individuals to express themselves, to have great autonomy in what they do and how they do it, and being able to produce whether products or services or processes in which needs and wants and desires of the market and those of various communities or peoples can be met through commerce, and be able to do it in a manner where they can be their authentic selves. So, and not just at the individual level where an individual entrepreneur or business owner can be able to express him or her themselves in a particular manner as they see fit, but to also be able to be part of a larger community, part of a larger economy, and having that economic and socioeconomic influence on what happens within their immediate and broader communities.
So it's much more than just working on your own, being your own boss and making a lot of money.
Absolutely, particularly in African-American community or minority community. So we think about BIPOC, in terms of Black, Indigenous people of color, which broadly defined includes Black Americans, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, or Latinos, and Native Americans. Yes, our work respectively and collectively, it's always been about the collective and wanting to find ways to empower the collective. So yes, while entrepreneurship may get a a bad rap at times for saying it's very individualistic,
Hmm.
and that there's, it's all about the meritocracy argument and saying, well, hey, I created this, I should reap the benefits of this.
Right.
Or most entrepreneurs, minority entrepreneurs, don't think along those lines based on the research I and others have conducted.
Yeah.
So in that regard, yes.
Yeah. And we could talk about this in a little bit. Because I'm changing the name from entrepreneurship to business owner, right? In part because of that. But yeah, one of the things that's always motivated me on entrepreneurship is I see it as, I want to say an equalizer, but that's not really the right word. But it is, well, if I think about like what our colleague, former colleague for you, or colleague, if you want to still call, Dr. Kelly Shaver, he would say, if you can't find a job, make your own, right?
Oh yeah,
And so, I think about entrepreneurship as a lot of times it's the last resort for people who, can't find work, right? Who are
right,
marginalized. Um, this gets to that whole, you know, um, necessity versus opportunity, right?
right.
And in classes like this, we're often talking more about necessity entrepreneurs, right?
Mhm.
Because it's somewhat opportunity because you're going to make more money, hopefully. Uh, but also, if you're really in, a marginalized community, such as, say, being Black and transgender, right? You're
Yes,
gonna have a real hard time, finding employment, right? So um, entrepreneurship is just that path. So that's what I love about it.
absolutely. And I mean, lots of individuals, you know, see themselves as hustlers. And I don't
Mhm.
mean that in, of course, the illegal standpoint, but
Right.
we want to take a Jay-Z reference.
Mhm.
Can't knock the hustle.
Right.
Think about it. It's like, well, if people are finding ways to be able to generate income
Hmm.
on their own, whether, creatively through, whether it's, through the arts, whether it's through, food service, whether it's something in which they have some talent or skill or
Yeah.
knowledge base, that may not be formally provided or trained, but nonetheless has that innate ability to do something and to provide something that a particular audience wants or a particular customer base wants. It's like, okay, then that's fine. Bring it to the marketplace and willing to put in the sweat equity to be able to do it. So in many respects, people, whether they're forced to do it and pushed into entrepreneurship,
Hmm.
they have that gravitational pull. It's like, yeah, I've always had this hustle mentality.
Hmm.
Why not transform it into something that can even be greater and more expansive than what you otherwise may have thought about or intended?
Yeah. Well, and this kind of gets back to the whole entrepreneurship versus business owner thing. Like, I've heard somebody just the other day in a talk say, um, my mom always owned a business, but she never thought of herself as an entrepreneur. Just that was just what we did. That's how we made money. And so, yeah, it is a different thought. That I've heard this many times from both women and minorities that they don't think of themselves as entrepreneurs, but business owners.
Exactly. And of course, again, we don't have to necessarily have to go down the road of defining,
Right.
specifically what entrepreneurship is versus business ownership, because we know that the definition of entrepreneurship in this growth model and, focus on innovation can be quite narrow. But of
Hmm.
course, as you and I know, everyone can become, can think like entrepreneur or adopt some of the
Right.
practices
Yeah.
and
They're
logics of an entrepreneur, regardless of what form of business or
yeah.
form of work that they take up.
Yeah, I've gravitated towards a extremely expansive definition of entrepreneurship by basically someone who's trying to make something or make some change. I haven't really settled on it. My definition changes like every week, but trying to figure out, okay, how do I capture what I really mean here? But
Right.
yeah, there's this I know we're getting off topic a little bit, but it fits in a little bit still, is that I don't know if you've heard about the work um, by Daniela Pappy Thornton.
Yes.
Yeah, and Heropreneurship. And so I've really dug into that. And that's what I think more about with entrepreneurship, right? Is recognizing, that it's not, one person that is, the hero, right? That gets all
Right.
the spotlight. It's all the connections, and it's the, right? A business isn't built on its own, right?
Right.
When you hear like, um, Senator Warren talk, right? And, say, entrepreneurs, it's great, wonderful you built, but you didn't build, you didn't build the roads, you didn't build, all that kind of stuff. But I also would add, well, you didn't do all the damn work either, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. You had employees, you had contractors, right? So it's not just you. And I would love to see us move more to that, thinking about, well, I'm thinking of this word now because we're using this book, but collective action, right?
Yes.
As entrepreneurship. But again, this is a debate and thing that will never be settled on what entrepreneurship is, but it's fun to talk about sometimes.
Exactly. And it's good for the students to be at least have some context.
Yeah. So speaking of this class, as I said, you created this back when we were first beginning our program at the College Charleston and entrepreneurship. And we had a great group and very bright future until the until the economic collapse and then a lot of other stuff. And anyway, so I mean, I kind of remember a little bit, like we were each kind of like making classes that we wanted, sort of. But what really motivated you, or what was your thinking and general idea on creating this class on minority entrepreneurship?
Sure. So let me just give everyone some context and some background. As of course, Dr. Hanson knows, I was hired at the College of Charleston from the University of Northern Iowa, where I was an assistant professor of strategic management there. And it was during that time while I was at the University of Northern Iowa when I started conducting research on Black women entrepreneurs and growth firms, primarily in male-dominated industries. And this was work that I, along with two of my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Jeffrey Robinson, who's a professor at Rutgers Business School,
Mm-hmm.
and Dr. Sammy Robinson, who is now since retired from Houston Baptist University. The three of us embarked on this study that was funded by the Kauffman Foundation. Thanks to Kauffman Foundation, I always have to give a thumbs up and heads up for that. To be able to fund our research on minority women entrepreneurs. And we wanted to focus primarily at that time on Black women entrepreneurs who were in growth industries and were gazelles, and located in high growth, growing cities and expansive and innovative areas. And predominantly these women are operating in male-dominated industries and they're highly successful.
So just really quickly, for those who aren't familiar, what is a gazelle?
A gazelle is defined whether it's a city or a business. A gazelle is a rapidly growing business, or in some places, rapidly growing city within where lots of rapidly growing businesses are located.
So it's not just, your family business, beauty salon or, retail store or whatever. It's
correct.
Right.
So we're talking about, particularly nowadays, over the beginning part of this century, we're talking about businesses related to STEM fields particularly. So whether it's in engineering, construction, large scale manufacturing, biological sciences, things of that nature that, again, primarily we're in male dominated industries, but those are the fastest growing industries in which these businesses are operating. And that's what a gazelle focuses on. Okay. So we wanted to study those businesses. And that research and the work that I did there was what attracted me and what the College of Charleston was attracted to in hiring me to be part of our large entrepreneurship faculty group. Because we had a really cool group of us. Yeah. Six of us were in the group, and it's like, at that time in 2005, 2006. So I was brought primarily to be able to provide guidance to businesses in low country, and to also use my scholarship in minority business development and economic development for that matter, to be able to educate students, conduct my research, and also to engage the community and the university in various ways. So part of my role was to be able to have the flexibility, thank goodness, to teach a class in minority entrepreneurship. So the first class was taught in 2009.
Okay.
And I taught it a second time in 2012, right before my departure to leave for another institution. So at that time, the minority entrepreneurship class was designed, and to be able to talk about the rich history of minority entrepreneurship, particularly among BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color in particular.
Yeah.
So students in the program, or students who took the course, whether they were an entrepreneurship student, whether they were a student in urban studies or a student in African American studies, students who were able to take this course as an elective toward their respective programs to learn about the history of minority entrepreneurship, the history of minority entrepreneurship in Charleston and the Low Country, which is, of course, a very rich history, as well as to be able to gain insight into the milestones and challenges that minority entrepreneurs faced during the 20th century and this, up to today, and still are facing to some degree. So I wanted students to be able to have that appreciation. And also students at that time during my course and my iterations of the course were able to work with as teams or within teams with minority entrepreneurs within the Charleston area, the Low Country. Many business owners and entrepreneurs were engaged in a number of different activities and had some strategic questions they wanted to have answered in some shape or form. And they were really excited to have a team of undergraduate students be able to help them explore some opportunities and strategic solutions to some of the challenges that they were facing within their respective ventures. So that's something else. And from a service learning standpoint, the students were able to gain from the course as well. So it definitely is an interdisciplinary course in many respects, because it is as much history as it is economics, as it is business development. But also, again, the service learning component, working within our engaged communities.
Yeah, and I'm trying to honor that as much as I can. I mentioned earlier before we started broadcasting that we're starting with the book Collective Courage, which talks about some of the history of the mutual benefit, mutual aid societies, and all that kind of stuff. And there is a service learning project. Students just got the list of potential people to work with yesterday, and are starting to reach out to set up, some kind of small project. The idea here is to have students learn a little bit about what it's like being a woman and or minority business owner, and while also trying to help that owner or organization that helps business owners. I've been trying to move. The term I was thinking last night was I'm not just flipping the class, like, when we talk about flipping the class, we move, stuff online versus in class, but flipping the class out into the community.
Absolutely.
What I'm trying to do with this is why we're broadcasting on Twitch. I'm going to post it on YouTube and LinkedIn, and because there's a lot of great information here that can be helpful and beneficial, and ultimately, I think we should be more than just educating students, but being part of and helping the community.
Absolutely. And that's part of the reason why I'm glad that you actually are expanding and broadening the nature of the course. I mean, for, one, to freshen it a little bit, because it's been 9 years since it was last taught.
Right.
And to be relevant to everything that we've experienced over the last 15 or 16 months, and how that, with the pandemic and with, racial injustice and police reform and the like, how that all plays into what role do minority and women business owners play in being able to address these issues with the pandemic, address issues of of economic inequality, address issues of injustices.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that regard, absolutely, so
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah, I just saw, I just skimming through, I don't remember where, but there was an article or a post or something about um, the impact on businesses from the various different stimulus packages, and it
Yes.
has been most effective in particularly Black neighborhoods.
Yes, so in terms of once Black business owners were
Mhm.
able to get access to it. So of course the key was in that first round of the PPP.
Mhm.
Most small businesses or most traditional size businesses,
Right.
small, medium sized businesses were locked out. They weren't able to navigate the legal and fiscal waters to be able to get access to those funds. And
Mhm.
those who had attorneys and accountants and large scale organizations
Yeah.
who could navigate, all the paperwork, were able to grab that funding right away. And so, of course, with the reaction to all of that, of course, prompted another round of PPP and
Mhm.
modifications as to who could qualify and apply and make the process more streamlined. But no, you're
Right.
absolutely correct in terms of the fact that that influx of financial resources and the like really
Yeah.
did help a number of businesses stay afloat.
Yeah. And
Unfortunately,
not,
some have closed still
yeah.
and is trying to find ways to rebuild or to
Right.
redesign how they engage in business in this new way
Yeah. Yeah.
of economy. But nonetheless, yes, that helped tremendously.
Well, I think what it was more focused on was the fact that the stimulus checks that people got um, were leading to actually more launching a business.
Oh, absolutely. So the fact that, yes, individuals who, whether they were unemployed or pushed out of a position because of the pandemic, or if they found this time of reflection and retreat into one's own home, whether they're working from home or not, as an opportunity to take stock in terms of, well, what is it that I really want to do? And maybe there is some idea that I have placed on the back burner for some time. And now this may
Mhm.
be just the opportunity to be able to
Yeah.
explore it and launch it. And then so the various forms of stimulus funding that was made available has been made
Yeah.
available to different people have prompted them to say, okay, let me use this as an
Mhm.
opportunity to do some things or to at
Yeah.
least explore.
And that, and not to get too much into politics, but that was why I was a fan of Andrew Yang, because of the idea of the UBI
Yes,
um, provides more opportunity for people to start business, gives that little bit of a cushion,
yes,
and then also learning that this was something that was promoted by Dr. King.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Not many people realize that,
yeah,
unless they've done some research on Dr. King's work in his last year before his assassination, from 60, roughly around April 67 to April 68. That was a lot of his, focus on economic justice and finding ways to engage that. And that was one of his tenets. You're absolutely right.
So we're actually, we got a question from one of the students, Donna Woods. Donna, do you want to ask your question or do you want me to ask it for you?
I can ask.
Okay.
So, Ms. Laquita, I was asking regarding your research that you mentioned earlier on minority women within gazelles, what were some of your findings?
Well, thank you, Ms. Woods, for the question. There are several findings, so let me try to keep them very, simple. Um, and if you don't mind, I'm going to just take a brief step back to give you some indication as to why my colleagues and I started the research in the first place.
Mhm.
So, as you may have learned, or you may learn in this course, and maybe reading, and some of the readings that Dr. Hansen provides to you, that currently over the last 20 years, so particularly since the turn of the century, that the demographic that has experienced the largest growth rate in starting ventures, starting new businesses, are Black women.
Mhm.
However, we noticed that with census data and SBA data and the like, after 5 years, the number of Black female owned businesses in the US that stay in business over 5 years dropped significantly. And we wanted to get a better sense of why. There were some other studies that were conducted by other colleagues of ours previously that made some inferences regarding, well, whether some of these businesses were really good enough to stay afloat, whether business owners, Black women business owners had the skill sets and knowledge to be able to be successful. And as a result, we kept thinking, well, that kind of statement or those kinds of conclusions may be inappropriately drawn. And we wonder, well, to what degree would that influence policy in terms of being able to provide guidance and support in supporting, from an economic empowerment standpoint, Black-owned businesses, particularly Black female-owned businesses. And so, and of course, we personally knew, my co-authors and I each independently knew several Black female business owners, Black female entrepreneurs, particularly, again, I mentioned before, of growth firms, true entrepreneurs in the truest sense, engaging in multi-million-dollar, revenues every year, asset bases, quite high. And it's like, well, wait a minute, are you counting these women? What's going on with them? If they're successful, are you using a definition of success that's different from what they're using? And so we wanted to be able to get to the bottom of it at least a little bit further. And so we conducted extensive interviews with these women. As you can imagine, sometimes surveys, when you complete a survey or a questionnaire for an organization or for whatever, the questions are not always in depth. It doesn't allow for a lot of context. Mm-hmm. We want to be able to make sure we can provide that context. So we, would interview individually, and in some cases within pairs and groups. We would interview 67 women in 7 cities across the US. And these are like 3-hour interviews with each of them. So lots of stories to be told, and tell us the history of how you got started. What is your background in history? Do you have a family history of entrepreneurship? Where did you go to college? Did you work within corporate America? And did you decide to leave? Did you hit the glass ceiling? All those kinds of things. And what are some of the challenges you face when you try to launch your venture? And then what are some of the challenges and some of the milestones that you accomplished along the way to get to the point where you are now? And then in the end all, we would always ask the question, if you were to do this again, would you do it? And what advice would you give to the next generation of Black female entrepreneurs? And resoundingly, the findings that we have, there were multiple, but to sum them quickly, one of the major findings is that these women view success in much broader terms of just economic or economistic ones or financial ones. We in America particularly tend to rely as a default on using finance and economics as the measure of success because, again, that's something you can count. But of course, success is defined much more broadly than whether somebody has a certain amount of wealth or income. And we want to explore that a little bit more, and rightfully so. These are women, again, who are generating hundreds of thousands of dollars and in many cases, millions of dollars in revenue every year. Their contracts in terms of procurement with business, whether it's with corporations or with state and local and federal government, those contract values are in the millions of tens of millions of dollars. So they're generating lots of income. They are employing lots of individuals and the like. And they view success not just in those economic terms. Sure, they are successful, but they want to be able to find ways to express themselves, as we talked about earlier in the class, how they can have autonomy and a means of being able to be their authentic selves. And also, they want to find ways in which they could leave a legacy for their children and those who came, after them. They also want to be purposely located in various communities. And they wanted to be able to employ from various communities, whether their own where they live or other communities where they might not necessarily live, but they support in some capacity. And they wanted their ventures to be able to serve as a mechanism for economic vitality within that community. So whether that encouraged other businesses to come along and build and locate with them in that same area, whether it prompted housing to be developed and other retail establishments in some cases. All those things, played a role. And they also said that they wanted to be able to show that one could be good, I mean, to do well and to do good. So we think about it from a business ethics standpoint. It's like, yes, we can generate money, but yes, we can do it in a very socially responsible manner where we are respectful of the persons who work with us and partner with us as stakeholders, as well as, being able to engage in many cases, in some of these cases, particularly because these are STEM businesses, in a manner that allows them to be ecologically sustainable as well. So they wanted to be able to live their faith or live their values in a variety of different ways that otherwise might not have been captured in census data or SBA data. So we wanted to be able to share that knowledge, and thankfully we've been able to do that in various ways. And in other scholars have now taken up the mantle and continued on some of the work that we had started this was back in 2005 to 2007. So that we could, so now when it comes to policy, now when we think about, for instance, during the pandemic and when that first round of PPP went out, it's like, oh, we need to really think about how's that really going to affect minority business owners, Black business owners, Hispanic business owners, and the like, women business owners, regardless of their racial ethnicity. And that might not have come to bear, or that might not have been in much of the consciousness before George Floyd of May 2020. That might not have been much in the consciousness of government officials had not some of this work that I, others, and those ahead of us and those behind us have conducted. So that's a long way of getting to your answer, Ms. Woods, but hopefully I was able to give you some additional context.
If someone wanted to read more about some of your work.
Sure, what I'll do is I can make, well, for the class, for your students, Dr. Hanson, I will make available links to some of the papers that we published and some of the, and some other sources that are available. And then for our listening audience, I can put a link in the chat for my website. Okay. My personal website or my professional website, where there are some links that you can find some of the work that I've done and find other ways to reach me.
Is any of it like published in like popular press books or?
Some of it not at this moment, but most of it's in journals and in other research centers. So some of them is for abridged research articles.
Yeah.
That is something that actually we have been working on for some time. We were a little behind on that to try to package the work that we have done. Yeah. And put it in a book or some way for the popular press or for the business press. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's part of, what my motivation is here is that, a lot of great knowledge is locked up, in a way, in the academic world.
Absolutely.
Right? We're not very good about disseminating and making that available, especially, when all the journals are, behind paywalls,
Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah. Now, so like interviews like this and, and I engage it with as an aside from the work that and just let everyone know, I am a professor of management at Agnes College and also serve as the director, the founding faculty director of the Social Innovation Master of Arts program at my college in Decatur, Georgia, just to let you know where Agnes College is. And so in that role, I'm able to continue quite a bit of the work that I started with minority business development and use it in a slightly different context here. But it allows me the opportunity also, it's also with my consulting work, to engage with organizations and with other bodies of business owners and entrepreneurs who want to enhance their business, and policymakers who want to be able to find ways to help business owners of all stripes, particularly those of BIPOC.
Yeah. Great. So there was a question on Twitch. I'm not sure if you saw it.
I did not. I have not been looking at the stream. Okay. So I'm.
So Dr. LNJ says, Dr. Blockson, what do you attribute their differing definition of success to, and how does it impact the way they operate and grow their business?
Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you, Dr. Ellen J, for your question. Um, in our interviews of these women, it's amazing when when you have someone one-on-one. And let me just take a quick moment, and this is from let me I'm going to be a little geeky here and talk about methodology. This will be very helpful for the students. And as I mentioned earlier before, of course, when you complete a survey or a questionnaire, oftentimes those surveys are quantitatively driven, so that statistically you're able to see certain patterns and relationships. But oftentimes those types of interviews, those types of survey instruments do not allow for context to be drawn or inferred. And we want to be able to make sure that we could be able to provide context. So instead of using surveys, that's why we use the long form interviews, because we wanted the women to be able to speak in their own language on their own terms and define it, because we also realize that sometimes we use different definitions. How we define success and how we define other things regarding business development and business ownership differs from what group you're in and how you identify. Yeah. And it was very helpful that, to be honest, that my co-authors and I are Black African Americans. Two of us are women, obviously. And coincidentally, we're talking about mutual aid societies and secret societies and the like. All three of us as researchers and scholars are also members of the National Panhellenic Council. So we're members of Black fraternities and sororities. And we recognize that that's also an entree into being able to engage with these women, because many of the women also belong to sororities. So many of them may belong to my sorority, which is Delta Sigma Theta, and others may belong to Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, which is my colleague sorority. So having that shared bond helped a lot. And also from an observational standpoint, to be able to code switch, that's a good way of putting it. Be able to take the language and interpret. We call it in research standpoint, from research standpoint, we say interpretivist. We are interpreting language. We as researchers, myself and my colleagues, are able to code switch because we know both languages. We know the language of academia, we know the language of broader society, and then we also know the language or the mannerisms and values held by African Americans. And we are able to find ways to take the language that's spoken by one party and to translate it to another. And so having that comfort level, having that knowledge and that expertise to be able to code switch allowed us to be able to glean a lot of different things when we interviewed these women. In terms of, like, for instance, the values they held. Many of them refer to spirituality in a number of different ways, and saying that, they were led by the creator of all, or God, or whoever they show as their base of faith. They say, if it wasn't for God speaking to me, or if it was not for God protecting me through these challenges, I would not be where I am today. And you may not necessarily get that from a survey instrument.
Right.
And the fact that they're able to talk about some of the challenges they faced as being a Black female business owner. For instance, like in terms of procurement, how do they engage with others in terms of obtaining those contracts? How do they get to the point where they were no longer a subcontractor, but they were the prime contractor, or the ones for which they were able to engage, and how they navigate that process? One particular person, and I remember it specifically, mentioned that she used to have a front. It was like, okay, we understood what a front meant, but she, in essence, even though she was the owner of the business, even though she was very happy to own the business, she purposely did not put her photo on the website for her business. And she purposely, depending on who the audience was or the potential client was, she did not go herself to negotiate the deal. She sometimes would send a white man to go start the process or negotiate the process on her behalf. And toward the end of the process, when everything needed to be signed, that's when she would walk in. Like, oh, wait a minute. So who's the owner of the company? And she was like, I'm the founder, I'm the owner, I'm the one who created it. But she knew that she had to play that game at times with some audiences or with some potential clients. Not saying that she should not have reached out to that client, but she recognized that there are more than one way to skin a cat. So if I want to answer Dr. Ellen J's question
Before you get
more
there,
specifically.
since you're talking about, the value of, interviews over surveys, I just want to point out, that most of the students here have had classes with me before, and they know in my entrepreneurship, my business modeling class, that they have to go out and do interviews.
Absolutely.
And, and the starting question is, what does XYZ mean to you?
That's right.
With, whatever the topic is, surfing or, baking or whatever it might be, because that just gets the discussion going. Just like, today, you could see how it, that open question like that really gets a conversation going, and you learn so much more, right? The surveys, one, it really depends so much on the wording, right? And how somebody interprets that wording. And so you never really, get a true response. And then all you're really doing is getting averages, right? And
Yes,
we're not interested in the middle. We're interested in the extremes,
that's
right?
right.
So you don't get that. So that's why I'm a big fan of, doing that type of research. And that's why I make the students do it, because, you're going to learn a lot more about your customers by talking to them than by doing a survey,
Yes,
right? So,
absolutely right. So, and so you're absolutely right. So, and again, everything is about context in my um, professional opinion
mhm,
and my professional assertion. It's great to have. Now, mind you, statistics are wonderful and you need them.
mhm,
It's okay to be a quant jock, but just appreciate the limitations that sometimes quantitative studies can provide.
right,
Or what they're, or why they're asking questions the way they're asking them. So they're trying to control for things that they otherwise don't want to interfere with their ability to be able to determine a cause and effect.
mhm,
So in that regard, they want to be able to rule out things. We want to be able to add in things.
right, right,
So to get back to Dr. Ellen J's question,
yeah,
how does their different versions of success affect and influence how they operate their businesses and how they grow them? The women that we studied, many of them found that they were able to still again be their authentic selves, even at times where they feel like they had to have someone else do some work or let work ahead of them. They could still be able to operate in a manner in which that allowed them to have that flexibility they always wanted, the autonomy that they wanted, the independence that they wanted, and to be able to think more broadly about how they engage the community. So again, a lot of these businesses were located in urban areas. And let me just make sure the audience and your students understand, urban does not equate Black. So when we think urban, some people will use urban business development or urban ownership, business ownership or urban entrepreneurship as a euphemism for Black or Latino business. And that is not the case. So I want to make sure everyone understands that. But they really see success in again, much broader terms than what we in society have defaulted to from an economic standpoint or economistic standpoint. There is some work in sociology that talks about what really success is and why we look at success, why in America particularly we have gone to the point of looking at success in very mostly financial terms. And to say, well, wait a minute. So are you saying that those who appreciate the arts or those who engage in practices that are not highly monetary, that doesn't generate maybe a lot of income, are you saying that's less of value? So it's like, well, what role does beauty play? What role does artistic expression play? What role does the humanities play? And so, of course, the College of Charleston has its liberal arts roots. And so we applaud and appreciate Agnes Scott College is a liberal arts institution. So we applaud the richness that the arts and humanities bring to us, and allows us to be creative and to think broadly about the work that we do as citizens in our, respective communities and broadly, throughout the world. So there's a value in it. The question always becomes, how do we place that value? How do we measure that value? And it's hard to measure the value of beauty. It's hard to measure the value of art or artistic expression. And so it's like, we're going to just default to the easiest way possible. But these women is like, no, we're not going to just default to the fact that, yes, while they may generate hundreds of thousands of dollars, or millions of dollars in some cases in net income, after all the taxes and everything are paid and expenses are paid, yeah, they may generate lots of wealth and lots of income, but that's not what defines them.
Mm-hmm.
And they make points to be able to engage in practices and to be, again, socially responsible or economically or ecologically sustainable, and to be able to have a presence within not just their immediate communities, but broadly the African American community, the Black community, to say that, yes, this is how it can be done. Yes, you do not have to sell your soul to be able to be a business owner or an entrepreneur. Yes, you can make a difference in a variety of different ways. And they wanted that to be present in all aspects of their operations.
Yeah. Ms. Monique Hill has a question.
Yes, I do. Hi, Dr. Blockson. This is such a great conversation. I am always just invigorated by these types of conversations, but also just hearing the research from those that are doing the research. So thank you for that. But I immediately thought when you were talking about how you proceeded with talking to the women, engaging in more of a focus group type survey or questionnaire. And I thought of Goldman Sachs, who has done a really great job over the last couple of months of doing their listening tours.
Yes.
And I was also thinking at the same time, because I've been trying to connect these two worlds that I have, health and entrepreneurship. And that is one of the things that keeps drawing me back to Goldman Sachs, is because they're investing this huge amount of money, 10 billion, I think.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, 10 billion. And they're not just investing in capital, they're looking at the whole Black woman. So those health issues, those other social factors that we don't hear when we're talking about business, such as sometimes she may be the head of household, she hasn't inherited wealth, she is unhealthy because she's doing all the things to keep everything together. And I guess my question for you is, in terms of strategy for keeping the focus off of Black women failing in business and the stigma that comes with that, how do we shift that conversation so that we are talking about this in a social context instead of just the obvious, lack of funding, the underbanking, and things like that?
And that's a wonderful question, Ms. Hill. Thank you so much for asking. And I'm going to answer it in two parts. One, again, the pandemic, we may curse it, or we may be disappointed at the very least and disgruntled at the fact that it has upended our lives. Over the last 15 to 16 months has upended our lives, particularly, the early part of the spring of last year, spring and early summer. But it, again, allowed us to really take focus on looking at, well, where are the health disparities? It brought a lot of attention to, who are unhealthy among our populations, and who are the ones who are in the course, when we think about those who are essential workers, most essential workers, particularly on the lower end of the income levels, are those people of color, BIPOC. And the health disparities that they're facing, let alone the health disparities within our respective communities as a whole, it brought a lot of light to that. And that was a reckoning that the healthcare industry is still dealing with. And I know I've spoken with a number of scholars and colleagues of mine who work in public health and in the medical fields, and saying that, yes, this is an issue in terms of health disparities that we've been trying to work on for a long time. And we're glad that it's finally getting some of the national attention that it richly deserves. And also realizing that, again, during this time frame, people were trying to find ways to stay healthy and wanted to be able to figure out, well, how can I stay healthy, even if I'm underemployed, unemployed, working as an essential worker, or whatever the case may be, how can I make sure my family stays healthy? And so, yes, it is. Goldman Sachs and other organizations and other corporations are now realizing that we need to really make a huge investment in being able to address these health disparities on a number of different platforms. One of those platforms, as you mentioned, is like, well, maybe we need to be able to encourage business owners, minority business owners to engage in business in the health fields. And yes, those Black female business owners who had already been in a line of business that related to health and public health or medical field of some sort, they're the ones who've actually been doing well, as you can imagine, during the pandemic, because there's now a greater need for their services and their products. And then others are realizing, well, maybe there's some other, maybe I can make a slight shift of the kind of products I was offering, at one point, and now maybe there's a way I can offer the product in a different manner or make an adjustment to the product to be able to take advantage of the fact that, yes, people are now more concerned and are conscious about their health. So in that regard, that's really a good thing. And to get back to your wealth question in terms of, Goldman Sachs and others now finally really making a commitment and investment in minority-owned businesses. And you really hit on it in a manner of speaking. Many Black, some of the women that we've interviewed and others since our study with the Kauffman Foundation has indicated, say, you know what, we receive a lot of guidance, a lot of knowledge, a lot of support in that regard, but we're woefully underfunded. And then there are some studies that have been conducted where Black women were, when they're presenting their proposals to venture capitalists, and they may receive less funding, if at all, versus if there's someone who did not look like them walked into the same room with the same background, the same proposal and the like, and it's like, oh, great, we're going to give you this money and we're going to provide some funding and the wherewithal to be able to give you, the runway to be able to launch. And so, so in that regard, more and more businesses, more and more funders, whether they're foundations, whether they're corporations, whether they're organizations who wish to partner and engage in procurement opportunities for Black female business owners and minority business owners in general, they're recognizing that they played a role in not being able to support these businesses earlier. They played a role in contributing to indirectly the challenges that these business owners face. So I hope I answered your question, Ms. Hill. But yes, it's good that now people are recognizing, and institutions and agencies are recognizing their role in what they had not done in the past, or some of the egregious, and some we argue egregious practices that prevented wealth development in the first place. We're not even going to go into redlining. We're not even going to go into the discriminatory practices of the GI Bill from post World War II. That played a huge role in affecting the ability for African Americans in particular to be able to generate generational wealth, from home ownership and free college tuition and the like. So that's a different discussion for a different day. But nonetheless, now organizations and institutions are being called to the carpet for that.
Yes, thank you so much. That's exactly what I was trying to get an understanding of, because I think, in my professional world and, health disparities and that type of work, and we talk about the social determinants, and it's, I don't see a lot of the conversations, not meaning they're not happening, but a lot of times those conversations are so segmented. So you're talking about health, you're talking about medicine, and economics is not always. Economic development in terms of infrastructure is often in the conversation, but not really what Goldman Sachs and what you mentioned, your work with Kauffman, where does the investment really need to go in order to move the needle?
Right. No, I get it. And so, not to talk about politics per se, but that's part of the reason why with the Biden administration, why that administration is promoting a very broadly defined infrastructure plan, infrastructure bill, so it's not just roads and bridges and the like, even though roads and bridges are direly important, because you can't if you think about the bridge that now has been closed in that spans Tennessee and Arkansas, for Memphis and West Memphis, when that bridge shut down because it was unstable, that affected commerce going, east and west, in the middle of the country. So you can imagine that's just one bridge, so yes, infrastructure in that regard for roads and bridges are direly important in transportation broadly. But of course, infrastructure also includes or can include, and we argue should include, what are we doing to support the educational and familial foundations that will allow for families and communities to really thrive and prosper. So whether that means, funding education in different ways, funding preschool and Head Start, whether it's providing mechanisms for seniors to be able to age in place and to be able to live healthy lives, in various capacities. What is it that we can provide that familial structure and foundation that we see in other countries doing it quite well? It's like, why can't we pull that off here? Now, of course, Dr. Hanson and I, we recognize some of the answers to that, and from a more individualistic standpoint, the meritocracy argument, and saying, well, if I built it, I should reap the benefits of it. I should not have to share with anyone. And we can go down that road another day. But luckily, now more and more discussions are taking place currently regarding what infrastructure really means. And it's not, again, just roads and bridges and airports. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I should add that, and I believe it was last year, both of you spoke.
Indeed, I remember, Ms. Hill, when you had us for your class last summer. Absolutely.
And I've been working with her a lot with my other classes, including this one. So I'm very thankful to her for her help in reaching out to entrepreneurs for the students to work with, and just providing the insight to me. I'm in no way, shape, or form an expert in this. I'm learning as I go, and so I'm on the journey with the students, and just trying to do what I can to make connections. That's kind of I'm a connector.
Absolutely. And you've always been known as a connector, that's for sure. And as I am, and so that's why we get along so swimmingly.
Yeah. And not just because our birth dates are almost the same.
That's right. We're just literally like a year apart.
A year and a day, right?
A year, a year, just one day shy of a year.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So one question I had was, like, what would be some advice that you would have towards the students? Most of the students, are it's a variety of students, but particularly, are white students, right? What advice would you offer to them to support minority-owned businesses?
Absolutely. Thanks for that question. So for the students, of the majority, I'll say it that way. First of all, thank you for your interest in this course. That's first and foremost. And no doubt, Dr. Hanson is a great professor, a great colleague. So if you've taken previous courses from him, then you know his style and approach, and no doubt you're going to learn a lot in this class. But thank you for your interest in the topic itself. The fact that you're willing to, in many respects, do the work. There's going to be, in some cases, some of the work that you're going to read may cause you to have to really take stock in what role you have played, or role that your previous generations have played, and why we are at the state we are now. And so being able to take stock in that and recognize that, whether, again, most likely indirectly, not through you personally, any contributing factor, but nonetheless, indirectly historic. Dig deep. I encourage you all to, if you get a chance, I believe Dr. Hanson is going to have an opportunity for you to work with to access the archives at the Avery Research Center on campus. Please do that. That's something, again, I had my students do in terms of really understanding the history of Black business ownership, particularly in your case, the Low Country in Charleston and beyond. Learn the history, get a sense of what's going on. And this is a prime time. In fact, late this weekend, we'll start the beginning of airing of a number of different documentaries on the Tulsa massacre. This is unfortunately the centennial of that massacre.
Yeah.
So no doubt you're going to learn a lot more from Dr. Hansen about Black Wall Street and the Greenwood area of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And you'll learn also about, other large areas or cities that had a large history of business development and business growth, like Durham, North Carolina, like Chicago, like Philadelphia, and then toward the second half or third or the last quarter or so of the 20th century, cities like Atlanta, Georgia, and Charlotte, North Carolina. So of course, you're going to learn that rich history and get some sense of what took place. And also think about what role that you can play going forward, how you can be an advocate for being able to foster business development. And that's one of the reasons why I'm glad that the College of Charleston, when I developed the course back in 2009 or 2008 and taught it in 2009 for the first time, that the Urban Studies program and the African American Studies program were keenly interested in this class, because we recognize that even if you ultimately decide not to become a business owner yourself or an entrepreneur yourself, you have a role and you have an opportunity to be able to help foster business development. So whether it's by being a connector like Dr. Hansen and I are respective connectors, and connecting people within the entrepreneurial ecosystem with others, so that if you know individuals who have resources or have knowledge and maybe quite interested in being able to connect with someone who could benefit greatly from those resources, and say, well, hey, this person has a great idea and it's a concept that's feasible, that's desirable, that's viable. It just needs just that little extra amount of capital to get things launched so that they can turn the key and open the door and have business functioning. And so they might just need that, just that little bit. You may be able to serve as a connector in that regard. Or if you're working in a government agency, or you're working for a lending institution, or commercial banking, or working in some other capacity, or in a corporation where you can, work through your company's procurement office to say, well, hey, if we need someone to be able to provide this product or to render this service for our organization, why don't we reach out to some minority business owners, women or female business owners, to give them an opportunity to provide their services and their products to us. And so those are great roles that you can play. So even if you decide ultimately not to become an entrepreneur yourself, there are different ways in which you can foster, both in a professional standpoint and as just as a engaged citizen, to be able to allow or to help foster the growth and vitality of Black-owned businesses or minority business ownership as a whole.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point about the reaching out to businesses, because I've had Miss Ruth Jordan, who runs the Women and Minority Business Office for the City of Charleston, had mentioned that a lot of, or there's, I forget exactly there's supposed to be a certain percentage of government contracts that go to, women and minority owned businesses, and it's always falls short of that.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's definitely a need for more people within those organizations to help facilitate, that, or
Absolutely.
to help people connect to, hey, you know what, look for this government contract.
Absolutely. And there are some associations and organizations that help facilitate just that, like the Minority Business Development Procurement Association, where these are individuals who work in procurement, both in industry or in government agencies, to say, we want to make sure that we're playing a great role in reaching out to business, minority business owners or female business owners, so that we can increase those numbers and we can either meet or exceed those minimum thresholds that we have placed upon ourselves, or in some cases have been placed upon us. Absolutely.
Unless students have a question, I'm going to keep asking questions. So if you have any questions, raise your hand, virtually, or write something in chat. But I'm curious, throughout all of the research that you've done and read, was there anything that really kind of surprised you?
About business, about minority business
Yeah.
development?
Yes. Yeah.
That is a good question. Well, you know what? It's amazing how some things did not surprise me. And, but yeah, that I would probably say that what surprised me in terms of like the research that I conducted with the Black women business owners of growth firms is that, of course, intuitively, it's like, yeah, success from an economic standpoint, financial standpoint is important. We're not discounting at all. Just like the audience know, your students know, and our audience on YouTube and Twitch know. No, we are not discounting, one ability to generate income and wealth. Not at all. That is a priority. It may not always rank as the highest. It may not be the top or the sole factor, but it's still up there, no doubt. It did pleasantly surprise me that the women felt strongly about that. It's like, look, we're not here to be completely philanthropic. There is a role that we can, in which there's a mechanism. This is a mechanism through which we can be socially responsible. And we, define social responsibility in a variety of different ways. And yes, many of, they're philanthropic and, in terms of being able to give away money. Oh yeah, they give away, they talk about how much money they're able to give away to the causes they feel are just and important to them. But they also be the first one to tell you, it's like, no, we like money. We do want to earn it, not saying that was the motivation for why they decided to go into business or for themselves or develop these ventures for themselves. But nonetheless, that is what motivated them. But I will say another quick, interesting thing that I thought, I won't say surprising, but was intriguing, is that the generational differences in how these women thought. If we broke, of the 67 women, the majority of the women whom we interviewed were in their 40s and 50s. But there were some who were younger, who were young upstarts, who were kicking butt and taking names. And so now we didn't notice that those who were in, at that time, they're like late 20s, early 30s, who are really doing some cool, innovative work. And it's a shame I can't mention the names of these individuals because, we kept it confidential. And in the research that we published, we always, of course, use pseudonyms.
Right.
But in any event, their approach to entrepreneurship is different. And their lens of why entrepreneurship is important is different. And it wasn't surprising to see it that way, but it was very interesting to know how clear that demarcation is. And what I mean by that, everyone, is that for those of us who are Gen Xers and older, so Dr. Hansen and I, yes, we admit we are Gen Xers. And those who are, baby boomers, when we went through our, educational process, no doubt, I know my family, I can speak for it. I can't speak for Dr. Hansen's family, but, in my family and other Black families across the country, it was get a good education so you can get a good job and get a secure job. And, at that time, in the 80s and 90s, it's like, you want to stay with a company for 15, 20, 25 years, get that pension plan. You haven't heard that phrase in a while, have you? Get that pension plan and, just be a good company, employee. And so that was the logic that many of us grew up, that was placed upon us. So when I went to business school, all my degrees, my undergraduate degree, my MBA, and my PhD are all in business. So when I went to school, that was the first thing that was taught. Say, hey, we're going to groom you to be a great corporate employee and rise the ranks within, rise of the corporate ladder. And that is all great and fine. Entrepreneurship in and of itself was not really stressed because the logic that many of us were taught and many of us in our community was taught is that if you want to become an entrepreneur, learn on somebody else's dime. Learn the ropes to skip and the ropes to know from someone who's going to pay you in the process. Why risk doing something coming out of undergraduate school or not even going to college for that matter? Why are you going to try to risk, entrepreneurship is inherently risky, even though, of course, you and I all know that it's not inherently risky. It's just, it's risky compared to other forms of employment. But we try to get the risk out of there. We're just as risk averse as anybody else.
Right.
But in any event, the fact that entrepreneurship was not really stressed, to Black Americans, those who are part of baby boomer generation and Gen Xers, it's like, no, that really was not the focus. So yes, while we have lots of business owners and famous business owners who have come of age during that time frame, absolutely, but they were relatively few and far between. But this generation, those millennials onward, which really partners with and pairs with the evolution of how entrepreneurship is taught at the university level, because your students may not appreciate this, but entrepreneurship as a discipline was not really taught until around the turn of this century. If you want to study business ownership, if you want to study small business owners, you had to do it in a number of different ways, and it wasn't explicit and as rich as it is the opportunity you have right now. So students didn't really have a chance to learn how to be a business owner or how to launch a venture.
Right.
And now you have the opportunity to do it. So we have seen in the studies I conducted and the women who I interviewed, the ones who were younger, who were millennials and onward, or Gen Y and Gen Z, they're like, oh, I don't need to go through the corporate ladder. We see how to churn and how companies have evolved over time to the point where they're not as loyal to us as they used to be. So why should we be loyal to them? Why don't I use an opportunity to work with an organization, gain some skills, pay down some debt from college or earn some income, build some, reserves and capital of my own, and then launch? Or if I'm in a position to take my knowledge and skills and be able to leverage it in some way, coming out of high school, coming out of college, or even while I'm in college, to actually become a campus CEO, as Dr. Randall Pinkett will often say, why not do that? Why waste my time trying to work for someone else if I don't really have to? So that is the main finding that I thought was most surprising. I mean, I'm not surprised, but it was glaringly clear.
Yeah.
Generationally, those who are Gen Y, Gen Z, and millennials onward, how they view business ownership and entrepreneurship is much different from those of us who are Gen Xers and baby boomers.
So that brings up an interesting question in my mind, is how does that impact sort of community development? I'm trying to find the right words for it, but with generations working together and trying to build up, and you have these different perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Do you know anything about how that comes
I can
about,
say,
or?
yeah, I would say broadly, and I haven't conducted any research on this, so I'm, I'll take it in that regard. But yeah, broadly, yes, that can cause some conflict. And with, broadly in the Black community, it's like, well, the logic that us older generations may have about, well, how should we approach social problems, let alone economic ones? And the logic that we should use or could use. And the logic that younger generations are using now, it's like, well, look, the challenges that you faced, during your 20s and 30s is different from what we're facing now. Our society has evolved in a number of different ways. The social problems, while they still exist, they don't exist in the same form that they did 20 years ago. So why should we use the same approaches that we used 20 years ago? So you can imagine, and that's not just within the African-American community, that's with all communities. That's just a generational gap, and conflicts that arise just because of the generational differences. So how can we find new ways to approach these challenges? It does call for collaboration, and just to let your audience know, that's, as you know, that's other kinds of research that I do. So I don't just conduct research on minority-owned businesses, but a lot of my work on minority-owned businesses actually stems from my professional and my doctoral work in community economic development, and what role different people of different generations and different industries and different stakeholder groups and in institutions, how do they collaborate or don't collaborate to be able to address some of these large and tractable problems that we see within an economic development framework. So yeah, it's still a problem and it's a challenge, but now more and more people at least are willing to discuss it and say, okay, we need to think about different ways to skin this cat.
That all sounds interesting, but we and I'd love to talk more about it, but we have a few questions.
Okay.
Monique had a question before she had to leave, but I'll still ask it so she can get the answer later. She said, did you hear varied perceptions of wealth building and how that looks within a cultural context?
Yes, we did. And like in some of the work that we did, again, the women that we interviewed, the 67 women, most of them believed in generating wealth.
Mhm.
And they believed it was more than just an individualistic perspective, even though they knew that they would reap the benefits individually. So they wanted to, again, from an economic empowerment standpoint, as I talked about at the beginning of our broadcast, they wanted to be able to say, well, how can I be a cog in the wheel of positive and affirmative economic empowerment? What role can I personally play, professionally play, as well as what role can my venture play in doing that? So they wanted to be able, and particularly those who located their ventures within, inner city areas, and say, well, I want to be able to provide that stability, economic stability within a particular community that may have seen better days. Maybe there's a way for me to help contribute to the revitalization of those communities or that a particular community, and be able to also, again, employ people who otherwise may or may not be employable. How can they find ways to employ individuals so that they can themselves be able to generate, income and support their families and the like. So they want to, many of them purposely would approach where they located the business, how they hired, how they engaged with the community, how they engaged with their customer base. And of course, some of the businesses, their customers are not just those within the community. Their customers may be all around the globe for that matter. Or their customers might primarily not be those in the community, but there are people within the community who work for that business. So they wanted to be able to say that they could provide at least some lasting contribution to the economic vitality of the places in which they lived and engaged.
I think what she was getting at was the varied perception. So were there differing perceptions within different cultural contexts?
I would say, based on our research, outside of that more communal perspective, not much.
Okay.
And if I interpreted her question correctly, it wasn't necessarily a generational difference. Hope I'm interpreting her question correctly. But for all intents and purposes, no, I did not see a distinction separate from that.
Okay.
And so if we want to take it from, how we, if you want to take it to the point where we're looking at it from an Americanized standpoint or a Westernized standpoint. So maybe that's part of where she's coming from.
Yeah.
So yeah, many of these business owners, they recognize that they are Americans. We grew most, and let me tell everyone, just to make sure everybody's clear. When we sought these women out, we were very intentional as to who we wanted to interview. And so this is part of where the control part, where we're being quantitatively focused and driven, is really important. So we purposely included and made a point that the ladies who we interviewed had, first of all, the businesses had to be 100% owned by African-American women. That's first and foremost. So these are businesses that were not handed down to them. These are not businesses that were part of a family business and that they inherited. It is not a business that they purchased from somebody else. It's something they started from the ground up. That's one thing. The second thing is we did focus explicitly and exclusively on sourcing women who have a history or legacy in their family of slavery. So as you can imagine, so depending on, when we talk about immigrant entrepreneurship, which you may discuss in the class at some point, Dr. Hansen, we talk about immigrant entrepreneurship, individuals coming from different countries who have different experiences about what entrepreneurship means and what business development means and collective wealth means. And so, yes, they may bring some of that to the table in terms of our American fabric, but we recognize, because of the history of enslavement here in the US, particularly, that and the challenges of those populations that come from that legacy versus those who may have immigrated from the US from some other country. We wanted to be able to recognize the fact that that was a challenge that they wanted to be able to overcome. So in that regard, yes, they are thinking a lot like Americans compared to, like in terms of more collectivist African societies and the like, for instance.
Okay.
Even though, of course, we talk about the history of business among African, of the Black diaspora, of course, we have to go back to Africa as well, particularly West Africa. The thriving communities of Senegal and Nigeria and Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, business development and merchant, and mercantilism and commerce and exchange has been present for eons.
Mhm.
So it's not that, all of a sudden that we have to learn how to do this once we were freed in 1861 and then recognized in 1865 with Juneteenth. But no, we've always had knowledge. We've always had an innate sensibility to be able to do this and to generate wealth and stability for our communities. It was just taken away from us for a period of time.
So we have a question via Twitch from Dr. LNJ again.
Okay.
Did you discover any fundamental differences based on background, region, or any demographics besides age?
Well, to clarify, thank you for the question, Dr. LNJ. To clarify with this study, because we used a different methodological approach since we used an interpretivist approach, and the fact that we actually used, we interviewed Black female entrepreneurs. Aside from age, we really didn't see much of a difference because of that population. Now, there are other scholars before us and since us who have conducted studies that are more comparative and saying, well, how do Black women, female business owners compare to white female business owners or Black male business owners? What challenges do they face, or what milestones have they accomplished, or what successes have they experienced? So that's not the kind of research that I conducted myself, but that is research that others have. And yes, they have found some innate, some distinctions between, how women are treated, how minorities are treated, and then when you combine the two, how Black women or women of color or BIPOC women are treated. Now, as part of the studies that our study of the 67 women, they did mention, that sometimes being a Black woman was great in terms of being an entrepreneur, because it allowed them flexibility. They recognized that some areas and some markets they were able to tap that were otherwise untapped and the like. But then, of course, they also might face some challenges for being, a Black woman, whether discrimination from in gender perspective or discrimination from a racial ethnic standpoint, or some combination of both.
Right.
So in that regard, and I know I can think of a quick example of a particular business owner or entrepreneur who works in construction, owns a construction company. And the challenges that she faced in trying to be the prime contractor or the prime, procure that bid as being the prime on that bid. And that a Black man tried to, undermine her ability to be able to do that. And so she's like, wait a minute, I thought we were in this together. I won't say in it together, but, thinking broadly, collectively as a people in the community. It's like, well, wait a minute, why are you doing this against, why are you going against me in this regard? Or why are you undermining my ability to be able to participate in this procurement process? And that's where I guess the more individualistic standpoint comes in and say, well, I have to look after me. And may not think about broadly the community or broadly about African-American or Black business owners in the broad sense. So yeah, there can be challenges, so I think about Sojourner Truth, and ain't I a woman? And will come up in terms of being a womanist and saying, yes, I may be Black, but I'm a woman. I may be a woman, but I'm also Black. I can't separate the two.
Right, yeah. Donna Woods has a question. Did you want to ask it, or would you like me to read it?
I can ask it. In our class, we're reading about Black cooperatives and how they were established, and I just was wondering your thoughts on how they were when they originated, and your thoughts on how they transpired and evolved to how they exist in society and communities today.
Sure. So thank you for that question, Ms. Woods. And yes, so we think about the history of Black business ownership and Black business development. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, it really starts in Africa. So again, once we left Africa, once we were taken, those of us who have a history and legacy of slavery, of which I am one, at least in part on my mother's side, the history of business and commerce in Africa, and we were taken away from Africa, and then we were forced into enslaved labor, which did not allow us to be able to reap the benefits of the work that we were able to produce. Even though we may have been very creative and skillful and knowledgeable, we weren't able to reap those benefits monetarily, until 1865. And so in that regard, that's when, because, white-owned businesses were not going to support Black, newly freed enslaved individuals, formerly enslaved individuals, they had to find some ways to be able to meet their own needs, whether it's, providing funeral arrangements for those who pass on, or educating young individuals, or providing medical care, or providing means of which to get foodstuffs. They had to figure out some way to be able to do that. So that's where a lot of secret societies and mutual benefit societies and mutual aid societies arose to saying, well, let's pool what resources we do have and use those as a means through which we can lend money to others, or provide services and underwrite the cost of providing services to those within our community. And then over time, that's when we're able to use as a foundation to develop insurance companies and banking institutions, commercial banking institutions, and to broaden our reach that way. And and so co-ops fall under that broad category of mutual benefit or mutual aid societies in that regard, of saying, well, we want to be able to, come together, take and pool our resources in a particular manner, to be able to share with others or share amongst ourselves, with the intention and expectation that it will benefit the broader community as a whole. So it really evolved from, historically since 1865, and in many respects going back to originally how African business was conducted, and then finding a way to be able to do that within this new country that embraces, again, individualism, freedom, expression, freedom of thought, and using that context to be able to engage in that kind of work. So now that you have a lot more, co-ops or other forms of businesses that could stem from that. There's, of course, as you're reading, they do still exist. They don't exist to the same extent as they once did, because things have opened up for us. And so we weren't restricted from having to engage in those lines of business. We're able to form businesses, legally in other aspects, and we can reach out to different markets and different pools of customer bases. And at others, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There was also McCarthyism that kind of really.
Oh, no, that played a role. Oh, absolutely no, that. Yeah, we can't leave out the 50s in that regard. That played a huge role as well. You're right about that. And of course, of the civil rights movement of the 60s, and then affirmative action in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, those were pivotal roles as well in terms of what role can Black Americans play in being able to engage in commerce and not be restricted to secret societies, mutual benefit societies, and the like, that otherwise was the only way, or one of the few ways we could engage in commerce, save, other, some other business owners. So in that regard, I hope I answered your question. But yeah, so the co-ops of today, they're necessary, they're needed. I support them, and I know other Black business owners try to find ways to support them as well. But we also recognize there's a lot more competition and a lot more opportunity for African Americans or BIPOC members to be able to engage in commerce in a number of creative ways that are not just cooperative. But the cool thing about co-ops is that one can practice their values and exhibit their values in terms of being socially responsible, ecologically sustainable and the like, and the ways that we think about when we talk about benefit corporations and, having, establishing B Corps and all that you may have learned in another class from Dr. Hansen. We think about benefit corporations and having that legal status to say, yes, I want to own a business. I want to create a venture that will allow me to generate funding and allow me to generate income and wealth. But I'm also being very mindful of the fact that those who invest in my company or those who invest in my venture, they're not going to get the same kind of return on their investment as they otherwise would in a traditional business or a traditional venture, because they recognize that I recognize that it's important for us to be able to be as we would call a neighbor of choice within one's community. If we're not being socially responsible, if we're not engaging in an ecologically sustainable manner, then the likelihood that we're going to be able to survive as a business may be fraught. So let's start from the ground up and saying from the beginning, this is what our foundation is. And these are the ways in which we can engage with each other in a very communal fashion. And it may just not necessarily be a cooperative business that does it. It can take a number of different forms.
So a question I'm trying to figure out the best way to formulate it, but I'm thinking, what do you think are the biggest advantages that African-American women have as entrepreneurs? So what is it that they, in particular, compared to other demographics, bring to the table that
others don't?
Whether it's a market advantage or just any kind of advantage?
Well, it definitely can be a market advantage. I mean, because there are a number of untapped markets, Black women in general. If we want to compare the demographic to other demographics, going back to a question Dr. Ellen J. asked earlier, there's a lot of untapped potential among Black women as a resource, as well as, let's just be frank and honest about it, as a consumer group. So it's only been within, so even though the needs of Black women have existed for ages, more and more businesses are now, and people are now recognizing, well, maybe there's a way we can have those needs addressed. And a lot of Black women are figuring out and have determined, like, you know what, if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? Right. So whether, it's the founders of Mented Cosmetics and the Lip Bar, or, other organizations and other companies are saying, well, I want to produce products for Black women because that's an untapped market. Their needs are not being met. I can relate, and I can meet those needs and find a way to meet those needs, and in doing so, still be commercially feasible, viable, and desirable. So in that regard, yes, that's an advantage that Black women do have. And also that Black women bring a wealth of knowledge and experience that otherwise may not be appreciated. And that goes back to my comment earlier. Again, oftentimes when Black women business owners or entrepreneurs are seeking funding, they're often told, oh, yeah, let me help you, but first I want you to do this, this, and this, or let me give you some advice about something. And not always realizing that person who's giving the advice or attempting to give that advice may not always realize that the Black woman may have a lot more knowledge than that person who's giving the advice. But that Black woman recognized that person who's giving the advice really has the connections and the power and the influence to be able to provide the funding. So like, okay, I'll listen to you. I'll think about and consider what advice you're giving me, even though you may not be necessarily the right person to give me that advice, but I might need your money. So let me listen to you. Yeah. So in that regard, again, Black women, we're overeducated and under-resourced. So there's an opportunity for them to be able to find, try to find creative ways to access those resources that will allow them to really build upon the businesses, whether they're focused toward the Black community or not, to be able to survive and thrive.
Yeah, and there's a growing number of funds that are specifically targeted towards minorities broadly, or even very narrowly to Black women, or anywhere in between. And that's so
absolutely lots of new venture capital funding, organizations or collectives are coming together to be able to say, yes, we want to purposely fund Black women and Black, or women of color, or women or minorities, to say, no, we intentionally are pooling our resources. And these are high net worth individuals who are saying, yes, this is important. So we want to be able to provide a mechanism through which those who wish to pursue this path, or in many cases, let's be honest, they already been in business, or they have started their business, and they're now at a point where they now have to grow, or they want to grow, and you need that additional seed money or that additional capital to take them to the next level.
Right.
And so while there are lots of funding sources available through the SBA and other lending institutions and other funds that can get someone started, oftentimes it's to the point where someone wants to grow their venture, where do they go to get that additional level of capital?
Right.
And oftentimes that's where at the 5-year mark, where some businesses start to fail. So because they couldn't get that additional rent, funding to allow for that additional on ramp.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the people who are looking at the businesses not understanding the business,
Yes,
right? They don't understand the
absolutely.
market, they don't understand the customer, so how can they understand, the potential?
Exactly. And this is where um, those who, in terms of Community Reinvestment Act and work in economic development plays a huge role, and community development plays a huge role, so that you're really understanding your customers. So, banks, of course, they're forced to, and they're required by law, federal law, to abide by the Community Reinvestment Act and saying, okay, if you're going to locate yourself in a particular community, then you need to be able to demonstrate that you are lending funds to that community in a variety of ways, for home ownership, for business development, and the like. Now, some banks don't do a good job with that because they strategically relocate their businesses and their locations, or have a presence felt in some communities that is not at the threshold of where it could be. And then that's a way for them to escape having to fulfill that requirement in that community. But nonetheless, those are mechanisms that will force individuals or force companies, force lending institutions and funders to say, okay, if we really want to support these ventures, we need to find ways to do that. And like what Wall Street Without Walls, that organization, that collective of individuals. And for those of you who are not familiar with Wall Street Without Walls, it is the financing and venture capital equivalent to Doctors Beyond Borders. So these are wealthy individuals and institutions, financial institutions and the like, investment firms, commercial banking institutions and all, that where those representatives and those organizations come together to say, well, how can we use our resources in a manner that allows us to affirmatively enhance the financial and economic vitality of communities, various communities, particularly of color, or in certain areas, whether urban or rural. And so they use their knowledge and expertise to be able, again, to be like a connector, and to be able to connect the right people in the right places with the right resources so that they can allow for large-scale development as well as small business development to take place.
Would you have any kind of advice for women of color that are trying to explain their business to others in that fundraising aspect? So like, you're going to, a pitch, right? How do you, what's the, best way to, I don't know, explain a market that other people don't, because, there's techniques within like, the biomedical commercialization, right? On how you can spin it so that, people who have no idea what any of this technical stuff is can understand it.
Yeah, so this is where, again, that where my interpretivist lens comes in again, and being able to code switch. And so recognizing that different audiences may need to hear your pitch different ways. So if you're going in front of, if you're competing in a pitch competition and everyone, and the pitch competition is very general, then you will need to be able to communicate and convey the argument that your product is necessary or needed or desired because of the population who you are trying to serve and what their needs are or their desires are, and how that might be an untapped market. Yeah, and so the language that oftentimes we use is untapped market, right, in many respects.
Graphs of the market growth and
absolutely
numbers.
Oh no, definitely lots of numbers. Lots of numbers. So you have to, you have to do your due diligence, you have to do your research. Right. And be able to access census data, SBA data, other statistical data and sources. That's of course where big data does come in handy. To be able to justify, what through your business model canvas or your business plan, or whatever the case may be, what this market is and the value of that market, and what you're willing and able to bring to the table, and what you can do, either how you're able to address a segment of that untapped market, or how you can address a needed untapped market in a particular way that others cannot or won't.
Right. Yeah. So it's making that connection between what you bring to the table that others can't, and that there's this market out there that is untapped and is looking to just give their money away to get
Yeah.
more of this, right? And so you know, if you can, you know, pitch it that way,
Exactly.
anybody listening doesn't have to understand or know why the product works or how it works or, you know, whatever. It's just this person can make it happen and deliver it to this group of people who are willing to pay for it.
Right. Now, of course, it does help to have some of that knowledge. I mean, because, you know, of course, a funder is going to want to know, well, what do you bring to the table?
Exactly.
How is it that you're going to be able to make it feasible? Because it's one,
Mhm.
because a business opportunity that you present or an idea for a venture may be feasible, but the question is it feasible for you?
Right.
So you have to be very knowledgeable and confident that, yes, you or the team around you or the access to the various knowledgeable or resourceful individuals connected to you around you will allow you to be able to say, yes, it
Right.
is feasible. Yes, I can do this because I have the resources in place, or I have the people in place, or I have this innate knowledge and experience from another capacity that otherwise you might not otherwise found.
Right. So you're not just selling a product or a market, you're selling your ability.
Oh,
yourself.
absolutely. And that's with any venture.
Right.
You know, so it's not just, you know, of Black female owned venture or not. Any aspiring entrepreneur needs to be able to convey that. It's like, yeah, because again, anyone could have this idea.
Right.
You know, so the question becomes, who is going to be able to be in a position to launch it?
Right. I'm just thinking that, you know, there's an inherent bias already, you know, both being either woman or minority, that you're not going to have the skills or the knowledge or the ability to make it happen, right? Because people don't
Correct.
associate, you know, rising startups, big firm, big tech companies, for example, you know, with anything other than, you know, people like, you know, Jeff Bezos.
Right.
You know, so
You know,
so
you're
I think,
absolutely right. You know,
I
but
think
you know what
there's,
they say about assuming.
yeah, right. But that's something that, you know, has to be overcome, right?
Absolutely.
Because they're the ones who control the money, right? So I
Yes.
think, so I what I'm getting at, I guess, is that, you know, whether I think you would agree that it's ever more important for women and minorities to really explain what it is that they bring, what is their
Yes.
unique abilities, more so because it's not going to be assumed. It's
Correct.
going to be just the opposite. It's going to be assumed that no, you're a woman. Why? How would you know anything about, you know,
Right.
sports or, you know, whatever?
No, you're right. No, and in a way, it's unfortunate that we have to take that extra step to
Yeah.
be able to educate. And so part of, you know, one argument is say, well, why should we have to educate you on something that
Right.
you should otherwise either have an interest in knowing or should be able to embrace in knowing. But if it doesn't come, you know, if it comes down to it that someone needs to be able to educate them, it's like, okay, then we need to take the extra moment in time to
Yeah.
do that. So classes like this help tremendously in that regard.
Yeah.
But you're right, you know, it does take the ability again to speak that language or to convey that message. I won't say to make it palatable, but more again to educate and inform and empower.
Yeah. So Lucy Burr has raised her hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, so I know you touched on this in regards to us as students, but I was wondering, in your experience in providing guidance to women-led and minority-owned business ventures, what is a piece of advice that you have given to women-led or minority-owned businesses specifically who are just starting out?
My biggest piece of advice is to do your research and allow your research and your data gathering and your due diligence to allow you to make an informed decision. You know, the last thing I want someone to do is to jump in headfirst and not have done the work and done the research to back it up, because you're going to lose time, energy, and funding in the process. And that's the last thing we want any entrepreneur, any aspiring entrepreneur to engage in or to experience. So I always say, do your homework. And even when I teach I teach social innovation, and to my students, I have students who actually are not business majors. They were not business majors as undergraduates. They're graduate students who have undergraduate degrees and the humanities, the arts, the sciences, STEM fields and all. But they're now but they're really empowered to want to address and affect positive social change. They're trying to find a way to really do that can be long lasting. And so through social innovation, which of course you may, from Dr. Hansen's previous classes, may understand what social innovation and social entrepreneurship entail. But it's a way, in essence, to be able to apply entrepreneurial thinking and design thinking to be able to address social problems. And so students may have a lot of variety of ideas, whether it's to address a social problem or to be able to go into business and be able to offer a product or service that they like or that they think that others will like. But they don't want you to go in head first and thinking that, oh, I have this idea, or oh, I want to solve this problem. Let me go ahead and just jump right in and do it. Let's provide some of that context. Let's provide some of that history. Make sure you've done your research and your due diligence so that you can make an informed decision, because the last thing we want you to do is to go forth and develop this venture and not have done the homework. And as a result, you're going to lose money and time. Or from a social innovation standpoint, you're not going to really get to as much the heart of the issue as you think you have, because you're going based on your own pure limited experience. And it takes learning about others and their lived experiences, as well as the history or current state of affairs, or the current marketplace, beyond just what your lived experience may be. And so I encourage students to do their work. One thing, for instance, I'll say broadly, when I teach my students, most of them, of course, they're your age, or traditional age, or maybe a little bit older, and they have no cognition or have no experience with a typewriter or with a rotary phone for that matter. And they're like, huh? What is that? I say, oh, so you never had the experience of putting your finger in the hole of a rotary phone and actually dialing? And you have to put your finger in the right number, and you have to allow for the different clicks to take place so that call can be placed. So they're like, oh, that's how it works. And so they never had to experience, when they say about dialing someone, when they hear dialing a phone, and when you think about dialing a phone, you're thinking about from your cell phone. You're thinking like, okay, I'm just going to press some numbers. So, dialing comes from that rotary motion from a rotary phone that was available until around the 1970s and 80s. And then push buttons came along the way. But nonetheless, the technology of that time, they didn't have an appreciation for it. But, it's important to be able to understand that, yes, that technology took place, and the expectations of how people interacted with that technology and what that involved and entailed was important. So if you think about, and I always use the example, I know I'm going to start teaching for a moment, Dr. Hansen, but I'll tell people about, the whole idea of when you're working in an environment in the late 80s and 90s, fax machines were a big deal. That was like, we didn't have email. Right. If you worked for a large corporation like AT&T, like I did, you were great to be able to have a network inside the organization that was just where you can communicate via some rudimentary form of email. That was a big deal in 1990. So of course, some of you may not even have that cognition about what life was like before email. But life, before email, people lived and died by the fax machine. And before then, you lived and died by inter-office mail. So you might actually type out a memo or type out a letter, put it in an inter-office envelope, send it to the mail room downstairs in the corporate building. They took the responsibility of sending it to the corporate offices all across the country. That might take 3 days. Have someone respond to that message in 3 days or that letter, type a response, put another inter-office envelope, take it to their mailroom, they have it sent back, and you might get that response in 3 days after they sent it. So the expectation of being able to meet someone's needs was at least a week. And you knew that. And he's like, okay, we're going to operate within those confines and those boundaries. Nowadays, everything's instantaneous. So our expectations have ratcheted up significantly. So the fact that we have emails and the fact that we actually have a computer that we can fit in the size of our hands, with our smartphones, now it's like everything is instantaneous and you want a response like yesterday. How do businesses respond to that? How do people respond to that? How do people understand how to address issues when you have this increased demand for limited time and they want immediacy? But sometimes the immediacy does not allow for reflection. And sometimes the immediacy does not allow for a problem or an idea to be manifest more fully. So I encourage everyone, all my students, you're all included. I'm going to include you as my students today. I encourage you all to think about what the technology was like before and how that influenced people's decisions and actions. Think about the technology we have today at our disposal and how that's influencing our actions and interactions with each other, and how that's going to influence how you engage in business or how you're going to engage with your customers or your stakeholders. And then think about what may happen 10 years from now. Some of you may have had Dr. Shaver for one of your classes. And one of the things that we all talked about when we were all on faculty at the College of Charleston was, again, you want to be able to create a venture or create jobs that don't even exist yet. What is it that's going to take for you? What knowledge do you need to know now? What foresight will you need to have to think about what the future might behold? Mm-hmm. And how are you going to be able to play a role in that future that has yet to emanate, but you have a role in playing and being able to create.
So going back to, the idea of research, you said, do your research, but what do you suggest to any entrepreneur? What kind of research?
Oh yeah, so dig into the data. So, whether it's consumer data, getting access to various consumer data, market data, PSA data, SBA data, and census data. Census is great. The census is not just, when we take that, when we do that survey every 10 years about our households and the like, that's one thing. But the Census Act, the US Census gathers a lot of data beyond just that 10-year mark. Yeah. And that you can access about not, your communities and, and like your zip codes, your actual census tracts and all. I mean, there's just, we call them a census tract, a particular location on the map. What is going on in that community in terms of whether it's business development, residential development, the type of, the population density, the population who comprise, what's the, composition of that population, the income levels, the employers nearby, the schools, all those different demographics and all those different statistics play a huge role in being able to really understand the community or understand a particular area. And if you're trying to reach a particular area, or you're trying to reach a particular population that may be across the country or around the world or globally, go to various government sites, various other data sites through the reference library, and reach out to your reference librarians at the College of Charleston to help you get access to data that can tell you, a little bit more about different people and what their experiences are and your interactions with things and the like, so that you, again, can make an informed decision about, if I want to provide a product to meet the needs of this particular population, I had the data to back up my rationale and to justify why this is important.
I always suggest the very first thing to do is a Google search.
Absolutely.
I've had
Google's your friend.
Students come in, it's like, hey, I've got this idea. And it's like, okay, type it in Google. And so, all right,
yeah,
it's out there.
That's right. Absolutely. So Google can be your friend.
Yeah. And just because there are other businesses out there doing it doesn't mean you can't. But
that is correct.
To know how you compare.
That's right. So not saying steal someone's idea. And
right.
Because we have, no doubt you have learned or are going to learn in some entrepreneurship classes about the role of intellectual property. So we won't talk about that today. But we will, say that yes, you can create a venture that meets a particular need that someone else is attempting to meet or is meeting in some capacity, but they may be limited in being able to meet that need, but you may be able to meet that need where you are, or to meet a segment of that need for a segment of that population that the other population is not being met. So yes, I'm not saying steal someone's ideas. We're not espousing that. What we are saying is you can find creative ways to be able to engage in business. And that's the cool thing about business ownership versus entrepreneurship, with, in terms of the creativity aspect of it. There are ways that, we need all kinds of businesses everywhere. So you're not limited to just your city. So every city, every environment, every community needs a variety of different businesses, both small and large scale, both traditional and both innovative. So you can find your niche and you can find a way to be able to provide that need or address that desire for a particular community or particular people or group of individuals or demographic is completely up to you. And there's a lot of market to be fulfilled.
Mhm.
No one company is fulfilling everybody's need.
Oh, right. Yeah. Like I said, most big companies, they're making a generalized product. It's a one size fits all kind of thing.
Right.
And so you're looking for those extremes.
That's right.
But some of the research that I, make students do, of course, is going out and interviewing customers,
Uh-huh.
getting to understand their thinking and their behavior, right?
Indeed.
And the value of that is that you then ideally have some quotes that can be very powerful, much more so than, some numbers, right?
Absolutely.
I also recommend, just setting up, a quick website and just testing. You can create a website for free, and you can, post about it in forums for free, and you can just see what the response is before you get too far along. And so there's a lot of stuff you can do quickly and cheaply as far as research to begin before you
Yes.
even start digging into, government databases and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do believe in the thought and the philosophy of multiple streams of income. So, and like I said, so it's okay, even at this point in college right now, there are things you can do. Of course, you need to do the research to back things up, but it is okay to have, if you're working right now, it's okay to work someone else's job or work for someone else while you are developing this idea.
Right.
So use that to your advantage. Even then, after you graduate, do the same thing. That's primarily what I did in terms of my work. I worked for a few different firms, a few different organizations that allowed me to build my knowledge and skills and resources so that I could venture on my own to do some things. One of those, of course, to get a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh, but also to be able to launch my consulting firm where I'm engaging with other organizations, in addition to my role as a professor and administrator at Agnes College. So there is no harm in being able to say, okay, yes, moonlighting is okay.
Yeah.
Putting in the sweat equity on the weekends and evenings is okay.
Yeah. At the first when we're calling Entrepreneurs Forum, they talked about working the 9 to 5 to pay for your 5 to 9.
That's right. Exactly. Learn on someone else's dime. It's okay to do that.
Yep.
That model, I think sometimes, I'll be honest with you, when we teach entrepreneurship, we sometimes will teach the model of, oh, you don't have to work for someone else. You can go straight forward and becoming your own business owner or entrepreneur. And I don't want our students to be, served a disservice in that regard. So no, I don't mind you. I encourage you, if you're going to, work for someone, learn while you're doing. Mm-hmm. And use it as in motivation and grist for the mill, as my professors used to say. Use that as the energy and the knowledge and the impetus to be able to start your own venture.
Yeah. And you can do that while you're working at that.
Absolutely. Oh, by all means.
And that's typically what you have to do, because when you're starting a business, you're not making any money.
And that will, of course, play into a determining factor of whether this is what you really want to do. So some people are called to entrepreneurship. This is their life. This is their vocation. This is what they've always wanted to do. And they are able and willing to put in the hours to do it. Others might not be called to do it, but they may be forced to do it in some capacities too. So you will need to determine for yourself, after you take this course and other courses, and as you're completing your undergraduate college career, you want to think about, okay, what role can I really play? How do I want to engage in a work life? What kind of work life do I want? And what are the short-term and long-term goals that I have that will allow me to live the work life that I want to live, or to live the life that I want to live, whether it's to be my own boss or to engage in work in certain capacities for someone else, or a combination of both in some way.
So for all of the people out there that will be watching this in the future, they're not going to college, or what would you say to them? I mean, right, as far as advice.
Oh yeah, so those who are not in college now, or college may be behind them, or they didn't have any aspirations for college, it's not too late, or it's not too late to become a business owner. There are a variety of resources available, so that if you don't have experience in business, whether as an employee or whatever. You know, the SBA provides a wealth of resources. The small business development centers throughout the United States can provide some of those resources and knowledge to be able to allow you to launch and start your own business. So no, you do not have to have an entrepreneurship degree or a business degree to start a venture. You don't have to have a degree at all, but you do need to be able to put yourself in a position to know what steps you will need to take to be able to accomplish that. And you know what people you're going to need to employ or to have in your corner as part of your team to be successful at it.
Yep. Yeah, building a network that you can learn from, and then finding out more things that you need to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, I never stop learning. Exactly. If the time we stop learning is when we really start dying.
Yeah.
So no, we're always learning.
Yeah. So we're going on, I think, over 2 hours.
Okay.
So what I want to do is just offer one final question, which is
Sure.
another variation on what I do with my DJ interviews.
Okay, cool.
And so I always ask, what gives you hope? But in this case, I'd like to narrow it specifically. What gives you hope for women and minority business owners?
What gives me hope right now, particularly, is that given, again, the last 16 months of this pandemic that we've been experiencing collectively, globally, it has been in some cases, a rude awakening for others and a confirmation, affirmation for others, as some groups, saying, okay, finally, people are recognizing what we bring to the table. Finally, people are recognizing the challenges that we as a society have faced and the underlying conditions that allow for that to happen. And now people are recognizing that, no, we need business as usual and how it was pre-January, February of 2020, how life was then and how business was then. Maybe we don't need to return to that. And we're in a really great position now, even as the world is slowly opening up, or at least the US is slowly opening up. We're really in a great position to be able to dictate or determine a new way of thinking and a new way of doing. It's just a matter of us being willing and able to embrace it and say, you know what, business as usual, got us to where we are. So why don't we think of some new creative ways to address the issues that we did have and do have, so that we don't have them, at least not the same way in the future.
Yeah. So I think the hope there is that you were already seeing some of that happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the fact that, lots of business, lots of minority business owners and women business owners are recognizing that, the business and how they engaged in business before the pandemic has now forced them to be more creative in figuring out, okay, how I'm going to engage in business going forward. And now whether it's a new market base and a new customer base, whether it's a new platform, whether it's a new means of delivery, whether it's a new product or service, how they might have made an alteration to what they're offering or the process in which they offer it. Now that gives them a new entree into whether it's an untapped market or a new way of expressing and capturing the existing marketplace, to be ready for this new normal that we're experiencing and will continue to experience. Absolutely.
Well, I think a lot of people have learned a little bit about entrepreneurship over the past, year or so. Simply when you lose your job, you gotta do that hustle.
You gotta hustle. That's right.
And
tell you that Jay-Z reference.
Right. And then you learn that there's the ability to make an income from that's going to be better than particularly in the service industry where people are grossly underpaid.
No, you're absolutely right. So having that recognition to be able to say, okay, maybe I can do something different that will generate more money than I did when I was working with someone else or working in a different industry, like you said, whether it's in food services or entertainment or whatever the case may be. So no, you're absolutely right. And there are different ways to be able to monetize or commercialize it.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's something that gives me hope as well. I try and look at, there's a lot of positive things that have come out of this pandemic. Obviously there's a lot of negatives, but the world has changed dramatically. So this is an inflection point. in society. And
Absolutely.
so,
If we're not adapting, then we're dying.
right. So I'm hoping for the best as we come out of this, for a better society, more business owners, more people achieving their goals in life. So I want to thank you, Dr. Blockson, for spending a couple hours this afternoon
I
speaking.
know 2 hours goes by so quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's really easy. Time flies when you're having fun, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
And
we're
it's
both
great to
we're both
connect with my
academics, so
college
we
in
can talk a
Charleston.
lot.
That's it. I know it, right? You know, I need to make my way back to Charleston. And, you know, it's been about 4 years since I last was in Charleston. So
Yeah,
I'm overdue for a visit. I
yeah.
miss the little country.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. When you come up here, let us know and we can get
I
together.
sure will.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
So thank you for the invitation. And I want to thank
yeah.
you, Dr. Hanson, also for your willingness to actually teach this course and to bring it back to, I think this is as talking about tapping a great moment. This is an opportune moment to teach this course, in light of the pandemic, in light of racial injustice and health disparities and all, this is a ripe opportunity for all your students and all those who are listening to us on YouTube and Twitch to be able to say, okay, yeah, maybe there is something I can do to address an issue that I see has emanated or has now become on the consciousness of a lot of people. And so this class may not, I'll be honest with you, this class may not, when I taught it the 2 times when I was there in 2009 and 2012, maybe maybe some of the students weren't quite ready for a class like this.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a moment now in 2021. I think this is the right time for a class like this. So I appreciate the fact that you're revamping it and you're bringing it back to life.
Yep. And I welcome any advice that you have and suggestions. Like I said, I'm learning as I'm going, and it's it's a good journey. But like I say, you only know if something works when you try it. So
that's right. That's it. So thank you for the opportunity. And yes, we will definitely stay connected through the summer for sure as you're teaching this course.
And I'd like to also, to say to everybody out there, we have a LinkedIn group called Supporting Women of Color Entrepreneurs in South Carolina, or SE. And that's meant to be just another place for people to network. So I encourage you to join the group, especially right now, because students in the class are required to write a post and get discussion going. So if you go up there and respond, Donna Woods has already, I think, posted something. So please go check it out, and don't be shy about using it to help and ask questions. And I want it to be a resource as much as possible to help. So and along with these videos, and so we have a few thank yous in Twitch. Margaret, who's in Enchanting Creature is her business. She says thank you.
Well, thank you, Margaret. It's so great to hear from you.
And Vicky is a star, says great interview.
Oh, cool. Hi, Vicky is a star. Thank you.
Das Christoph is one of my DJ friends. He says you have great energy. Yep. The X Factor says they arrived late, but the interview is still very stimulating. So I think this was really great.
Great.
So,
and again, thank you so much for the invitation. And I have to admit, I love Twitch as a platform. Again, that's another discussion for another day.
Right. Yeah. All right. So with that, thank you all. And normally I would go and raid somebody, but I don't know with a raid right now. So we'll just
no worries at all.
And John Hildebrand also. He you might know him. He was one of my colleagues at UIC.
Yes, I do remember the name. Nice seeing you on the chat, John.
Yeah. And then Coleman Love 28 says fabulous, Dr. Blockson.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Just
Thank
in
you so
case you're
much,
not
Kobe Love.
reading the,
Yeah, I know it's a little
Yeah.
awkward. I'm not reading the chat right now, but I
Yeah.
have to definitely look at the chat a little bit later. So
Yeah.
this would be great.
all right.
So thank you so much, everyone.
Yep. So the just also as a note, all of my videos on Twitch are saved for 60 days. And since there's no
Cool.
music, there shouldn't be any, muting or anything like that.
Oh, good. Yeah, we know
so
how
you
that
can-
goes with copyright infringement.
Yep. So you can those of you arrived late, you can rewatch it later. And I will be posting this on YouTube and linking it to the LinkedIn group. So again, I want to let this help as many people as we can help. So
Sounds
thank you
great to
again,
me.
and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.